Hello everyone. All right, let's go ahead and get started with today's video. So here I thought I would show you how you can kind of put together everything I have shown you on Java Spring projects throughout some of my videos, how you might be able to use that for some real world application. And what I decided to do was I'm going to show you how I'm going to create the project in Spring Initialzr, which is one of my favorite tools for being able to create a Spring Boot project from scratch. The website that I'm going to be using today is this site called AERSELO. Basically, what this is I'm part of the arm wrestling community, which I find to be a fun hobby for myself. And he has created this website to track wins and losses for arm wrestlers. So this is where we're going to go ahead and grab some data to play around with it. And I'll show you just how easy it is to do this in Java Spring. I know there's other languages you can create similar projects in, and I think there's debates on which language is the easiest, but I just want to also show you that it's really easy in Java Spring as well. So what I'm going to do is, in order to be able to tell what data I can get and how I'm going to get it, I'm going to go ahead and use more tools and then web developer tools. I'll go to the network tab, which I'm already at, and now I'm going to go to classes on here. And on this page, you can actually see the network request that was made, and there is a 200 OK. Here's the response from that page. But I know that if I do this first page, I don't get exactly what I want because I'm actually more interested in all results, which splits out pro and amateur. So I'm going to use the second one. And now from here is where we can go ahead and grab this URL, because this URL will tell us all the results. So I'll go ahead and snag that. I'll just go ahead and throw it in something like Postman. I'll send a request to it. Now I have all the results. And the only reason I'm using Postman is because in Firefox, it actually was kind of cutting off the results. And you can also see that it goes ahead and automatically formats the result here in Postman. So let's see what kind of data I've got here. So there's an ID, first name and last name, a division, an arm, a weight class, ELO, which is, again, it's a ranking. So if you've never heard of ELO, they use it for chess rankings. We're now using it to try to see if we can do like arm wrestling rankings, an arm ID, a division ID, day of the match, and a weight class ID. So let's see. I will pick somebody in here. Let's pick somebody at random. Let's find somebody in the amateur class that maybe crossed over because I just want to see if I can rely on any unique IDs. So let's see if we could find, so this ID, let's see if this ID is unique. I have a hunch that it may not be. There's 2 results for that ID. There's 4 results for here. So yeah, that's what I was thinking. It looks like there is a reuse of this ID, and then you have left and right, and pro and amateur, and looks like the weight class as well. So because of this, when I store the data in my database, I'm probably going to want to use this ID for the user as a primary key, the arm as a, well, sorry, this will be actually a composite key, the arm, and the weight class ID, and yeah, the division. So ID, division, arm, weight class ID. So that's what we're going to use when we want to try to store this data so I can potentially use it in my app. So now that we know the URL that we want to pull the data from, let's go back to Firefox. And now from here, let's go to Spring Initialzr. And we're going to name our project. So we'll call this, let's just call it ELO data, sure, because that's what we're storing for the arm wrestling data. And now here are the dependencies that we want to use in the project. So I'm going to use starter web, which I think is just web, yeah, Spring Web. And I'm going to use the Lombok dependency. This is one that will be used to create getters and setters, and basically just makes it easier so that way you don't have to write a bunch of setting and getting for different variables. I also want to use Feign. This is what we're going to use for creating a client in our app to make the request to and from that website. Since I'm going to have a database, I'm going to also use Flyway. So I'm going to create a schema to be able to save this data into the database. And excuse me, last but not least, I also need a Postgres driver. This is so that way for me, I'm going to use a Postgres database in order to essentially save this data. So that should be it. We're using Java 17, that's fine by default. We'll use 2.74 Maven project. You could use Gradle if you want. I'm writing in Java, not Kotlin or Groovy. And I'm going to do a jar and not a war. So we're going to go ahead and generate this. All right, and then I will open up this demo. I'll extract it to, let's just use, I think I made a new folder for this, so we'll put it under Tech Tutor, and we'll extract. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead. When you see this video, I'll have kind of cut out the beginning there where I was having a little bit of issues. What I just realized is that if you don't click the pom.xml when you're importing the project, it won't recognize it as a Maven project, or at least that's what seemed to have happened for mine. So I have figured all that out. Like I said, I saved you time, but I'll just cut that out so you don't have to watch me figure out what had happened. But now we should be good to go. Okay, so yes, this is our main class. So you can just go ahead and click run here. So I'll run it just to see that you're spinning up your Java Spring app. And there we go. So you'll see that it runs on 8080. All right, so now that that is done, we're going to go ahead and stop. And now from here, I'm going to use a few things. So I want to go ahead and use Docker for this. So I already have Docker installed. If you need more on this, then I would suggest watching some of my other videos. But basically, I'm going to create a Docker Compose YAML file. And in this file, you're going to be spinning up the Postgres database that we're using. So the way that this is done is essentially there's a version at the top, and the last one I have been using quite a bit was just version 3.1, and then you say which services that you'd like to use. So for this one, I'm going to use a DB service, and then you're going to say what the image is. So it is Postgres. And next, I like to add this property, which is to say always restart the container if something goes wrong. You're going to say which ports it runs on. So for Postgres, it's 5342, and then that is external and internal facing. So in the container, what is the port? When you're looking at it from the outside the container, what is the port? And then you will now want to put your environment variables. So for Postgres, if you want to look this up, you can actually look up the Postgres image. I've done this several times, so I already have it kind of in memory. So this Postgres user setting is the ability for you to say what the user will be. So I'm just going to say my user is tech tutor, and then you will also do a password, or at least I'm going to do a password. And keep in mind, all this is doing is just configuring this local image of Postgres. If you're using an actual database on an external server, let's say you host it in AWS or somewhere else, you're going to use the credentials that you've set up there. You wouldn't even have this Docker Compose file. I think I've caused some confusion in other videos there, so I just want to clarify that. So for here, I'm just going to make it simple. It's just going to be password. And then I'm going to set the name of the database, and we'll just call it ARM. So there we go. Now from that point here, we can open a terminal, and we can spin this up. And this is because I have Docker running. So again, if you don't have Docker yet, what I would suggest is installing Docker and then possibly watching my other videos where I'm kind of like spinning this up. I could put a link in the description to the Docker video where I kind of go over all this. But once you have this Docker file, you just say docker-compose up-d. That's to make it run as a separate thread. So I'll go ahead and do that. All right, and then docker ps, you can now see that that image is running, and it's being called demo-db. Okay, and the reason why, by the way, the demo is because that is the path, techtutor/demo, so it just goes ahead, takes the path, and then the container name and number. Okay, so next, after that, I'm going to now show you that you can use another tool such as DBeaver. So we'll use DBeaver to connect to the database. Okay, so once you're in DBeaver, you can click this connect button, go to Postgres, and then from here, it's already going to have the default 5432 localhost. The username, we called it TechTutor. The password we said was password, and the database we called ARM. So I'm going to change that. Okay, and we can test the connection. Refuse to connect. Let's see what I might have missed here. Let's go back to tutor password ARM. TechTutor. Let's try our password again. Connection refused. Let's make sure that everything is still looking good. Yep, running on 5432. Oh, I had a typo in my ports here. So it should be 5432. And I'm running on 5342. Slight mix up. Okay. So what you can do is that when you want to basically kill off the container because you had a database that maybe had tables you don't want, or you misconfigured something like I just did, just docker compose down-v, and then docker compose up-d. Okay, there we go. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and go back to DBeaver. And in DBeaver here, let's try test connection again. Oh, there we go. Now it works. Yeah. So you might run into things like that. Finish. Okay, so we have ARM, and as far as schemas, we go to public. There is no tables yet, which is what we expect. So going back to our project, the next thing I want to do is under resources, there's a DB migration folder. So this is actually automatically given to you with Spring Initialzr. This is why I'm saying that I actually like Spring Initialzr. Otherwise, you'd have to kind of read the documentation and know that you want to add this directory. But yeah, this directory, what's going to happen is that when you put a schema in here, Flyway will pick it up. It'll go ahead and run the schema and create tables for you. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, and this is going to be a SQL file. And then the naming for this, from what I recall, is something to the effect of V and then a number, so it could be like 1, 2, 3, and then you also have like your major and minor numbers. So we're just going to do V1 underscore 0 underscore 0, and then it is a description. So we'll just call this a init DB, and then it's a SQL file. Okay, and then for our file, or for the database, we want to create a table. I'll say if not exist. And then what are we going to call the table? So let's go back to Postman. We're going to call it, I think we'll probably call it maybe stats. So go back to our project. So we'll say stats. And what I did is I copied, just so that way I don't have to keep bouncing back and forth. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create our database columns. So if you don't remember the syntax for Postgres, go ahead, look it up. But I at least know what I want to use for this because it's a pretty basic database. I'm not doing anything too crazy. So I'm going to have an ID table, or sorry, an ID column. It'll be an integer. Let's also do a weight class ID. Yeah, that sounds good. So I'm going to do it like this because in the database, you want to do underscores. And then you'll see that in Java Spring, you'll do camel case. The camel case will automatically map to these underscores. So we're going to do the weight class ID, which is an integer. And then after that, let's go ahead and do, let's see, we also said we want to have division for sure and arm. So let's do a division column and we'll make that a varchar. Let's say size, let's just make it big enough just in case. So 32. And then we'll go ahead and so I don't have to keep typing all this out. I'll just go ahead and do that again and we'll do that for arm. That's kind of probably overkill, but just in case they make longer names other or longer arm names other than just right and left, if they call it like right amateur or something changes, let's just do 32. So that should be fine. Let's also store the first name and the last name. So first name, last name. Okay, and then this looks like this is a double essentially. So we'll call it ELO, and in um, Postgres, that would be real for the decimal numbers. And then what else do we need? I think that should be fine there. Let's go ahead and create a timestamp field. So that way we can see when we're creating each record. And last but not least, let's also hook up our primary key. So because I'm doing it as a composite key, we'll do it this way. So I'm saying I want to make ID one of my keys, weight class ID. We're also going to use division, and we're going to use arm. Okay, so that's good. Now I could remove these. I just had them there for reference. Okay, so now, since this file is there, when I click run on this project, it will automatically run this file and create this table in the database. So we're done with these two files. Let's go ahead and click run real quick and check our database. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh, see if it actually applied the schema. I don't see that it actually read the schema, so let me double check to make sure that everything looks good in the POM. We got flyaway. We put the SQL file underneath of DB migration. Pretty sure this is the right naming schema. Maybe I'll go look that up just to double check. But it doesn't look like it even tried to look for flyaway, so let's just double check to make sure. Let me refresh one more time just in case. Yeah, it looks like it's not there. Okay. So this is where I would say do a little bit of research. So let's look up flyaway schema migration. So this takes us to their documentation. ahead and do that. Okay, so let's go to Spring. All right, looking here. Let's see, I'm looking for the name of the SQL file. So, oh, you know what? I'm pretty sure I know what I forgot actually. As I'm seeing some of these properties, I think I forgot to tell Spring where the database is. So let me go back in there and do that. So in the application properties, spring.datasource.url equals, and now you do the JDBC, and then we'll say Postgres, and then let's go ahead. I can just go ahead and snag this from over here. So probably the easier way to do it. Should have a connection string in here. All right, we'll just go here. So it's localhost, and then it's 5432, just making sure that I get this right this time. And then we have called our database arm. Okay, and then we do need to do the other parts that I did to connect to this in DBeaver. We still have to specify the username, which I called TechTutor. And we also need to specify the password, which is what I just said was password. Okay, now go ahead, stop, click run. This should pick it up this time. See if I missed anything else. Spring.datasource.url. It is possible that this won't create a table until I create a repository class. So maybe let's go ahead and do that first, and I'll come back to this. I don't think I've actually tried to do it in this order, so it is possible that until there's a repository class, it may not be happy about this. So let's go ahead and create a package. So I'm going to create some of the standard packages that I usually create. So I like to have a controller package, a data package, a repository. Let's also create one for our client, and that should be good for now. Oh, actually, let's do another one for service. Okay, there we go. So let's go ahead and create our repository class. So it's going to be an interface, and we're going to call it, what do we call it? Stats repository. Okay, yep, interface. All right, implements. And then I need to say, I'll say paging and sorting. You know what? Maybe I forgot to add Spring Data to this project. That is why this isn't working. So that would make a lot more sense. So let's go ahead and figure out what the Spring Data dependency is, because I don't remember off the top of my head. So uh, let's go back to Spring Initialzr. Yeah, see, I forgot Spring Data. So looking at this document, data. See if it has the dependency. Yeah, there it is. Spring boot starter data JPA. See, this is why I have the documentation handy, because of things like this. This actually makes sense of why it probably did not try to do anything with the database. So we will now refresh it. Okay, now we have Spring Starter data. Now I should have paging and sorting database. Yes, there it is. Okay, so we need to say what uh, the DTO will be, and then we're also going to say essentially like what the uh, primary key is. So let's go ahead and start working on that. Actually, before I work on this, let's go ahead and comment it out and just see if um, now that I've added Spring Data, if we get our flyway migration really quickly. Yeah, that was it. So you could see here it talks about finding the schema, applying it to the current version of the schema, and it had validated that there was no migrations at the time. So now we're going back here and let's refresh. There we go. So there is flyway schema history. So let's go ahead and open SQL Editor. Actually, it did not apply any table changes. Let's go back and take a look. It did not find my migrations. That is why. Let's make sure that this DB migration folder is set up correctly. So yeah, it should be DB and then migration underneath it, which it appears to be that way. Let's just try to create our own just to see. So DB. Okay, yep, that is there. And migration. And we'll double check the documentation. Let's see. There should be something about the path here. Let's try path. Oh, there's too many paths in here. So DB slash, yeah, there we go, class path. So this is what I remember. The default for the directory is db/migration. You can modify it by saying spring.flyway.locations. I don't think I need to do that. I could, but let's go double check our project one more time. So it did not pick up db migration. Let's go ahead and move this. Let's delete this package just to see if this makes a difference. Okay, we'll stop. All right, let's create a new directory, db, under db, a new directory, migrations. Oh, actually, not migrations. I meant to say migration. Okay, now moving this back in here. And there we go, we'll run it. Looks like it still did not find it. Check our properties, no. Did I name the file incorrectly? I'm pretty sure this is correct. Okay, well, let's go ahead and check the naming convention because it's possible I did not name it correctly, which would make more sense. So let's go for like V1. There we go. Oh, you know what? I think I need a double underscore after. That could be part of it. Um, yeah, it looks like V1.1 double underscore. Let's see. Yep. It's the little things. Once you get used to it, once you do this enough, you might just reuse projects you already have, and then all this becomes very fast. But in the meantime, let's see if that picks up. Okay. It would help if I did not use curly braces and I use parentheses, which is the syntax. Okay, now we'll try one more time. Okay, there you are. And we have gotten to the point where we now have that schema applied. And if I refresh the database here, we have this stats table. There you go. And have ID, weight class, division, arm, first name, last name, ELO created. Great. Moving on. Let's go back. So let's go ahead and work on that repository class. Well, before we do the repository class, let's go ahead and create our our entity class that we will be using, because we need the entity class if we're going to create the repository class, and then we'll also need to put our primary key. So because we have a composite key, it is a little bit more complex here. So let's first go and create our, let's do our composite key class first. So we will call this stats PK for primary key, and then it needs to implement serializable. And I'll go ahead and use @data. So I have getters and setters for this. And then now is a protected long for the ID. Let's go ahead and pull this next to it so I can look at it for reference. So that we want a protected protected long again for weight class ID. We'll do a protected string for division and a protected string for arm. Okay, great. That will wrap up this key class that we're creating. All right, I still need that actually. So now let's go ahead and data again and create another class. This one we'll just call stats. Bump this over. So stats needs to have the @entity annotation to indicate that it is a entity in our database. We're going to say what the ID class is because this has a composite key. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to do this. But because of that composite key that we're using, we need to indicate that we're using that primary key class that we created, stats PK. And then now I'm going to also say what the table name is. The table name, see why it's not happy. I think I did not click enter. So table name equals, and then it is stats. All right, and then let's also do an @. I'll do it at the top. I like to kind of have things read nicely across, so like the shortest to the longest. So @data, this just gives us getters and setters for everything in here. All right, and then the next thing is we can start saying what all of our values are. We still want the same values here. We're indicating that this was a primary key. So now here I'm just going to actually change these from protected to private. And again, the @data is from Lombok that will give us getters and setters to this. And now, because I have created that ID class, now I can actually designate all 4 of these as ID, otherwise it will complain. And then lastly, I need to create these other classes, or not classes, variables. So now private private string will have a first name. And again, as I was saying earlier, you're going to camel case where the underscores are. It'll automatically map them out for you just because that's the convenience of Spring. Private string last name. For our real, that was a double when we get to the Java side. So private double ELO. For the date, you will need to add another annotation This one is creation timestamp. So what this annotation is going to do is that anytime you save a record to the database, it'll automatically create a timestamp and save it in your timestamp field. So private, it is a date type, and then we'll say, oh, not timestamp, created. All right, there you go. So now we have our entity class. With our entity class and our primary key class, we are done with those two. And now we will want to update that stats repository. So now we can uncomment this. And I believe it is, yeah, type and then ID. So I just held control, hovered over it. This is to remind myself how this works. So it is going to be stats first, and then we will say the primary key. So it is stats PK. And after I click S here, enter, there, now they're both there. Let's see. Oh, I believe I should not make, no, interface. I think it's extends. I think that's my mistake here. Yes, it's extends, not implements. I don't know what I was thinking there because the interface can't implement the paging and sorting repository. It needs to extend it. Okay, and here you're going to automatically get certain calls to basically create a CRUD repository. So Spring is already generating this for you. You don't need to do your create, update, read, delete. It'll automatically generate these for you, and we'll go over that when I pull this repository into my service class. But just know that if you want to read the documentation, you can do all kinds of things with this. And paging and sorting is great. I may not get into that in this video, but when you are doing a read to get the data from the database, what is awesome about this is that it will automatically allow you to do paging and sorting, and you can pass in parameters into the URL. If you want to see more on this, I already have videos on this in my on my channel. And you know, if I decide to expand on this video, if there's some interest in it, maybe I'll keep taking this video further and further and show how I might play around with the data and utilize the fact that we have paging and sorting. But in the meantime, we are done with this repository class. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create a controller class that we can actually get into our Spring app. So we'll just call this, how about stack controller? Because that's basically the theme we're going for here. And we will annotate this with @rest controller. So we're just saying this is a controller class. We're giving this annotation so that way Spring can scan our files and know to create a bean instance of this class. And I'm also going to specify what the request mapping is. So let's go ahead and say that this will live under /stats. All right, and then let's do a actually real quick. Let's do required args constructor. So what this does is if I mark something as final and I pull it in. So otherwise, if you haven't seen it before, there's also @AutoWire. That's another way to create beans and wire them in here. But what I'll be able to do is I'll be able to include a class. So actually, I haven't created it yet. I'm a little ahead of myself. If I create a service class, I'll bring that service class in here, and I can wire it in with private finals. Before I do that, let's go ahead and let's do a put mapping. Because every time we save it, it should just replace. It should do the exact same thing every time. We're not gonna like create and then create like copies over and over again. So we'll do a put mapping, and we'll say that the path here will just be store or maybe save. So we're going to call this stats/save with put, and that should automatically save from wherever we're fetching, which we're going to fetch from that site I showed you earlier. So response entity is what we're going to return, and we'll call it save stats. And we don't need any parameters in here for this. We're going to call the method, but for now, let's just go ahead and return a response entity dot OK dot build. Okay, so if you were to call this, you should just get a 200 OK. So I could go ahead and run that, but we'll skip that for now. So now we have our placeholder controller. Let's go ahead and actually create our service class. So that's right, let's do it underneath the service. So Java class, and we'll call this stats service. Let's actually do it as an interface first. So it's interface, and then we'll say uh, this will have a public. Actually, I think it already infers that it's public. So this will just be a void save stats. Okay, so we're kind of creating a placeholder for ourselves, and then I'll make another Java class. This will be our service, so we'll call this stats service, and I like to say IMPL. It's like the implementation of the interface. So now implements stats service. There we go. And now here, if I click Alt-Enter, I can automatically generate the methods saying I want to override the method save stats in the stat service. You actually don't need this. It's just kind of good practice, so that way others know what they can use from this class, and there's all other things in Java you can do. But I'm just doing it because it is a good practice. So at service, so that way Java Spring knows to scan this class, create the class. Again, at required args constructors, because what we're going to do is we're going to wire in our client when I get to that, which is our Feign client. We'll do that in a moment. And we're also going to wire in the other thing, which is we're going to say, well, not an at, but private final, and this would be stats repository. So stats repository. Okay, so as I was starting to say earlier, you put private final on a variable here. Required args constructor will automatically know to go find the instance of that object, and it will wire it in here. It's the same as if you did at autowired. I just prefer this approach. And then by the time we're done, we can do a save or a save all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a save all, and I'm just going to have like a placeholder. So what we're doing is you want to save an iterable, and our stats repository, let's go pull that back up again. It is giving you stats. So what we're going to do is let's create a list of stats, and we'll call this stats list equals new array list. Okay, great. So now we just have to fill this in here. How are we going to save the stats? Where are we fetching them from? Things like that. So let's go ahead and do some more of this. So the next step would be, actually, from what I recall, I have to add an annotation here for the Feign client to work. I think it's enable Feign client. There it is. So you're telling Spring Boot to enable the Feign client so you can use them. So we're done there. Now, the next thing I need to do is I need to set a couple of properties for Feign, which I don't remember those off the top of my head. Let's go look it up here. So let's go to Feign. See if it's actually called Feign. It might not be. Let's just do Spring Boot Feign properties. All right, so yeah, docs.spring.io, that's pretty good. Spring Cloud Open Feign, yeah, this would be good for us. So yeah, I like to go to the docs of spring.io. Here we go. Scroll through here. So there is a annotation that you're probably going to want to use. So this tells you a little about Feign client, how you can map out different things. Let's go find the properties. Um, Here we are. So Feign name URL. Actually, I don't know if I need per se any of these. Uh, what I could do is I could just do, oh, actually, this is probably how I'll do it. I'll just do it like how they're doing it here. So what they're doing is they're just creating two properties where they're going to do Feign, the name of the client and the URL that you want to hit. So let's go back to our project. So over here, let's create a Feign client. So we'll call it stats, or actually let's call it arm client because we're hitting that arm wrestling website. So arm client, and then from here, let's go back to the documentation to make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, you're annotating with Feign Client. It's actually an interface. That's right. So make this an interface. Okay, and we will just backspace so IntelliJ says, oh, you want to import this? Yes, I do. All right, Feign name and Feign URL. So back here, let's put the feign.name and the feign.url. So we'll call the Feign name arm. Yeah, just arm, whatever, that's fine. The feign.url. Let's do the base URL of the site. So if I go back here, let's do http arms.com. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the front party here, and then in my client, I will set up the API ELO snapshot and get all results. So let's go ahead and go back there now. Oops, I did not copy it. Let's hop back over there. See if I make sure I copied this time. There it is. Okay. So we should be done there now, and ARM client, great. So moving on. So now we also want to be able to specify the URL we're going to hit and the method we're going to use. So from what I recall, this actually is very similar to your controller here. So you have like a request mapping, and then you're going to specify the method that you want to use. For this one, we want to use the request method get, I believe. Let's just double check. And I believe it is a get. Yeah, it's just a get. Okay, so go back into the project. So it's a get, and then from here, we also want to specify the value. This is the path we're going to hit. So now let's go back here one more time. Let's put the rest of this URL. All right. In fact, I probably could have swapped it here and put API in the URL up there instead of here. That might be better. Let's do that. So take that, chop that off, put /API. Okay, great. Looking good. And from here, oops, didn't mean to do that. So public. And then what exactly are we getting? So, well, let's call it get, or no, say, no, let's say, yeah, it's just get all results. Okay, and what are we returning? So I can't just do an object here, but if I do an object, the problem with that is that I won't really have good access to it all. So what we're going to do is let's take a look at that data again here. So what I can do is Java Spring will automatically kind of map out fields. So if I like match the name here, it will automatically map this JSON to a DTO. But I don't really kind of like the way this is because I don't care about this here. It's almost redundant because I get that same information right here. So what I might do instead is what I could do is I could just, when I know that the data inside each of these is structured in the outside, like the property name of the JSON node is something I might not know. What I could do instead is just use a map and say, all right, the property for the key of the map is a string. And then inside of that, we have a list of structured values. So you see we have ID, first name, last name, division, and this seems to be the structure here. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do is going back over to here. So instead of object, we're going to say, I want to have a map string and then let's just object for a moment here. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do object there. What I'm going to do is create the classes to store that in. So now we're going to create another class, and we'll say arm entry. So that is an entry from what we saw there. So data, and now over here, these are all the fields. Let's see. I guess I could take all of them. Yep, sure, why not? So let's go back, copy that just for reference, and now we know these are the fields we want. So from here, let's do all these fields. So we'll create a long ID, private string, first name, private string, last name, private string, division, private string, arm. Let's see what we got left here. Looks like weight class is also a string, so private string weight class, private, call this, should call this a double, ELO, private integer, arm ID, private division ID, oops, meant to say that's an integer, private day, no, let's call this date. So now it's a day of match. And what else we got? Private, long class ID. Okay, so the key here, and I probably should just copy paste to make sure I didn't actually have any typos, hopefully I don't, is that you want to match the name that is on the JSON data. So that way it'll automatically pull that value from there. Java Spring knows how to map it with the object mapper, so it'll automatically pull these values into all these properties that you've created, as long as you've mapped the property correctly. Like obviously, if you did some strange property type that doesn't match the field value, it's not going to work. Okay, there we go. So arm entry is good to go. So now we'll close that. And now we're changing this object to a list of arm entries. Okay, great. There we go. All right, now let's move to the next step. The next step is to use this client inside of our service. So we will go here, private, final, arm client. Okay. And so here we're saying arm client dot get all results. And it is a map of a list of arm entries. So let's get our data map. Okay, and now from here, let's go ahead and iterate the map so that way we can actually get all the data out. So to do that, we will say for entry should be, I think I don't have this quite right. I think it's map.capital, yeah, there it is, and then the key and the value. So it is going to be a string and a list of arm entries. And then what we're doing for each one is we're getting that arm entry list, and we're iterating our data map dot entry set. So yeah, we're iterating our set of entries. Okay, so that's how we're going to iterate our map. So now the next thing I want to do is I want to iterate every single list of arm entries so that way I can get all the data. So we have an arm entry each time that we will be going into, so we're saying iterate the list. Let's see. Oh, I need to say get value because what I had is a map. So it's you can get the key or the value. I don't want the string. Again, I said I'll just ignore that. What I want is I want this. So I'm iterating the ARM entries inside of or getting the list of ARM entries and then iterating those. Okay, now stats. This is this class that we created, our entity class, is what we're going to use to create entities to save into the database. So stats equals new stats. And you could also use a builder class too. This is kind of like up to you. So we'll say stats.set. Let's set the ID. And so now we'll do from our results, we'll do arm entry dot get ID. Okay, stats dot, well, just for reference, so I don't have to try to remember what I had. Let's pull this to the side and go back here. Okay, so ID weight class. So we'll say dot set weight class ID arm entry dot. Actually, it automatically wanted to try to do that for me. Stats dot set division and then arm entry. See, it automatically tries to suggest that for you. All right, stats dot set arm entry dot get arm stats first name. Just about done here. Stats dot set last name stats elo arm entry elo stats set. Oh, nope, that's actually it. Create is automatically going to create for us. Okay, well, what we're going to do here though now is that placeholder we added. We'll say let's add um, that stats object that we created into our list of stats. So there you go. So we've added that in, and after that, we will take that list we've have there and go ahead and save all of our list results into the database. And in fact, that might cover it. I think that might be everything we need. Let me just double check here. So stat service, save stats. Okay, now what we want to do is from the controller, we're going to say private final stats service. Cool. From there, we'll just say stat service dot save stats. Okay, so when we call stats slash save with a put, we will end up calling our stat service and going to Control Alt, going to our implementation. That will go ahead. It will create a list of stats list. We're getting a map of data entries back from our Feign client. We're going to iterate that map. Then we're going to iterate the list that we're getting from the map each entry. Then we're going to create stats. We're going to add them to a list so that way we could do a save all. This is what I'm talking about by how Spring Data will automatically generate your CRUD layer for you, essentially. It gives you methods that you can use for free out of the box, essentially. So stats repository dot save all, save. You have a delete. There should be a all, I think, or find all, that's right. So find all, there's that pageable that I'm talking about, delete all by ID. You get all these out of the box. So if you ever want to play around with it, read the documentation, but honestly, I think this is great because it does a lot for you. That might be it. I think we might be good to go actually. So let's go ahead from the controller. So it's stats slash save. So what we want to do is create another one of these, and this will be a put. So it'll be localhost. This is just from something else I was probably using. Stats slash save. I'm gonna change this to 8080. Put. That should be good to go. All right, and then go back to our project. We'll stop it since we made a bunch of changes. Let's run it again. All right. And now let's go to Postman. Let's send the request. This might take a little bit of time. It does have to fetch the data and then process through the data and then come back with a response from saving it to the database. I'll probably speed this up. Okay, that actually wasn't too long, 18 seconds. Okay, so let's check our database actually. Maybe it's already saved it. So just control enter here. Ah, great. Look at that. So we actually have all this data. And let's do a count of our data. So select count from stats. Let's see how many rows we got out of that. Awesome. So we got 10,000 rows of data. And, we could do something where we say, let's just see if I could find somebody. I guess I'll just pick whoever. It doesn't matter. So let's say select star from stats, where, and we'll say first name equals, and then Brent, since he's at the top. Actually, let's just see if there's more than one Brent. There might not be. There you go. So you have Brent Rakers and Brent Felker. Let's do and last name equals Rakers. There you go. So look at that. That actually allows us to be able to see that he is in 4 weight classes for Pro, and because the weight class IDs are different, maybe I could have actually saved the name of the weight class so I would actually have a better idea of what the weight class was. But it does look like he is actually in 4 weight classes. We can actually go confirm this using the site. So Brent Raker. So let's go back over there. And so let's say Brent Rakers. Close this. Yeah, it looks like he actually is in that many. So he's in 198, 220, 242, 242 plus. So he's in 4 classes right and 4 classes left. That's perfect. That's exactly what we expected to see. So if I clear this, there should be all the classes again. Great. So now I have access to the same data that's already available on the website. And I could probably do something interesting here. I could potentially order data differently than what's already provided in the website. Perhaps I want to see who has the highest ELO overall, or maybe I want to see if I can actually start piecing data together to figure out who beat who, because as I went into that site, you can actually see who has wins and losses over other people. So maybe I could even try to figure out who the top 3 were at a tournament, because it's not necessarily laid out that way. But this is something that I'm trying to show you, that you can pull data from any site that has like public APIs that you can basically figure out using Firefox or Chrome. And people are doing this essentially when they're scraping websites and pulling down data. And just be able to play around with the data and see what you could do. But as you can see, this project wasn't that difficult. I mean, there was a few hiccups here and there. I wanted to kind of keep that in there so you understand how I would debug issues and figure out how to fix problems. But once you kind of have the hang of it, it's really not a lot of code. I mean, let's look here. So you have the controller level. So you have just these few lines of code. Let's go back. Here's the ARM entry. This is the DTO that I'm creating, so that way I can map the JSON the JSON properties we're getting from the site. So going further, here is our stats entity class. Again, these are your properties that are your variables that will match to your database table. For the particular one we were using, because there's no primary key that I can key off of in the site, I had to make this composite key. So this is a little bit more complex than if I just had one ID value, but still not too much. Stats repository, again, paging and sorting repository. I actually really love using this because it just makes it really easy. I get all the CRUD operations, and to add new ones, it's not that much, and you could dig through the documentation on that. So moving on, look at our service class. There's not much to it here. Let me minimize this. So here we're just having this one method. When you call it, it hits the Feign client, fetches the results. We iterate the map to get the list. We iterate the list. We create each stat entity, and then we save it to the database. In our ELO application, this was already generated for us because of Spring Initialzr. We just had to add enable Feign clients. And then moving on here, like I said, Flyaway, great tool for database schema migrations. It makes sure that if you were to keep spinning up and spinning down that database, it'll automatically create this table for you. You don't have to manually implement schemas. So again, Flyaway is a really great one. These are the table columns that we created. And then last part of it is this application properties file. And I also usually prefer to use YAML instead of properties, but I just kind of did it different because I always do YAML. So I did properties on this video. But as you can see, there's only 5 properties. And in fact, I could have gotten away with not using these. I could have put these 2 in the actual client file here. I just prefer to do it over here just because I like to keep it kind of configurable all in one place. So if I had a bunch of clients, you'd be able to do it here. So that's it, really. If you like this video and you want to see me take this further, maybe how I could end up using the paging and sorting repository to show you how I would, sort through the data, or maybe I'll keep looking at the page, see what other data I could find. Like I said, I do know that there is data in there that says like if somebody won and lost to somebody else, so I could potentially try to like build out what that tournament looked like because I know that that data is not there. So it's something you could kind of do if you have enough pieces of data yourself. You could create your own display layer that doesn't exist already. You could take the data, give new views that the site doesn't already have, or just kind of feed it into something that you want to do something with that data. So I hope this video was helpful. Uh, it is definitely going to be one of my longest videos. I'm positive because I was sitting there, going through step by step. Usually I try to cut that out and I just give you the code at the end. I'll still give you the code for this. I'll put it on my GitHub, so be sure to look for it there. And if you want to see any future iterations of this video, please let me know in the comments below. And please take a moment to like and subscribe for future videos. Thank you.